So for the last few days, I felt a pull to speak on the tragic murders of these women at the hands of men who once claimed to love them. But I also knew how disingenuous and dishonoring it would be to their lives and their legacy if I offered perspective without sharing my personal story. So we got to go back to the winter of 2010, and my divorce had been final for 3 years. It was a divorce process that was absolutely hell. I mean, there was no abuse in my marriage, but after I filed for divorce, which was something he initially stated he wanted, it was like a switch flipped. There were never ending threats of harm through voicemails, text messages, emails, accusing me of things that he would later admit to doing. There was a time he stormed into my home saying he was on his way to beat my ass, and he kicked in my bedroom door, and it was my son that had to restrain him. During our divorce mediation, it was a time he threw a bottle at me and hit me in the presence of both of our attorneys before storming out the room. There were so many PPOs, police calls, charges filed. During this time, I took a defense class, and after telling the facilitator what I was going through, he recommended I do something that I never wanted to do. He recommended I get a gun, which, again, I never wanted to do with 4 children in the home. But at this point, I honestly felt like I had no choice but to protect myself. So I got a gun. So it's February of 2010, and we are 3 years post-divorce. And on this particular night, I had just finished another day of getting kids off to school, doing my consultant work, seeing clients, teaching psychology classes at the night school at the college, and I was finally getting into bed, getting ready to go to sleep. And as I was dozing off, I heard this voice tell me to get out of bed, get on my knees, and pray for my ex. Now, mind you, no one was in the room with me. This was that still small voice that I recognize as spirit telling me very specifically to get out of this bed, get on my knees, and pray for my ex. And I was initially appalled, understandably, considering the 4 years of hell I've been through. However, by this point, I was old enough. I think I was 38 at the time, and I had enough life experience that it was proven to me that when this particular voice is heard, the one that I recognize as spirit, you don't ignore it. Even if it meant I needed to get out of my warm, comfortable bed and pray for a person who had spent the last several years wishing nothing but harm on me. So the next morning was just like any routine morning, if there's anything routine about getting 4 kids off to school. So I make that 40-minute commute to Detroit to do my work as a medical consultant. And I'm reviewing a case in this massive 12-story building, and a man that we'll call Walter, he comes into my wing and he approaches me at my cubicle. Now, this is a man who also, like I said, worked in the building, and he was known, for lack of a better word, for being a little unsettling. There was this undeniable creepiness and deviance about this man, about his whole energy. In the 4 years I worked in the building, myself, as well as many of my colleagues, female colleagues, we will discuss how off-putting we felt encountering him. We will automatically brace ourselves to be gawked at inappropriately, or even prepare for the under-the-breath, unsolicited commentary about what we were wearing or our body shape. And it was not uncommon for me, if I saw him, I would choose another elevator or go the opposite way so I can avoid it. So to have this guy come into my office first thing in the morning, approach me in my cubicle and ask me if I had a minute, had me feeling a bit irritated. Plus, I was on a tight schedule. The quicker I could get my work done, less risk of me being late picking up my kids from school, from basketball practice, from play rehearsal, whatever it was. So Walter didn't catch my hint that I wasn't interested in talking, and he instead took the liberty of sitting down in the chair next to my desk. And he started to ramble about how he was at this house and called over to this house on Vaughn Street on the west side of Detroit the night before. He was asked to meet some guys there who said they needed something taken care of. I just kept typing. He went on to say the guys told him there was a woman who had wronged one of their family members in a divorce. I'm typing faster now, hoping Walter would finally catch the hint and drift away. Then he said, I asked them where the woman lived, and they said she lived in Clinton Township. That's when I stopped typing. I lived in Clinton Township. Walter followed with, you have 4 children? I thought you only had 3. You got your kitchen remodeled last summer? Walter was obviously giving me specific details about my personal life and about my home to let me know without a shadow of a doubt that the woman the men were talking about that night was me. He said every time he would ask him a question that they did not have the answer to, they would go to a room in the back of the house and then come back out with the answer. But whoever was in that room never revealed themselves. And he asked them what was the name of the woman that they needed taken care of. He said that's when they said Rose Moulton. And it was then that he responded, Dr. Rose Moulton Blank. He gave them my married name. I was hyphenated at the time. And though I legally dropped my married name after the divorce, it was still listed in the building directory and on a lot of my professional documents. Walter said that's when everything shifted in the room. The men started filling his glass with more liquor, quickly becoming just more and more nervous and attempting to change the subject of the conversation. He said when it became obvious that they weren't going to give him any more information, he left. So y'all, it was barely 9:30 in the morning and Walter is sharing this heaviness with me and I'm paralyzed. You know how you go into fight, flight, or freeze? I was totally frozen. I was unable to move. Walter went on to talk about how he's watched me over the years in my work and in the community, and how he said the woman they were describing the night before, the conniving, manipulative woman, just didn't sound like me. He didn't look me directly in the face and said, "Do you have a gun?" And I nodded yes. And he said, "Well, I suggest you carry it with you at all times." He said, just because they stopped talking to me last night doesn't mean they're not going to reach out to someone else. And with that, he left. I remember shaking so bad that as I picked up my phone to try to call my family and my friends, I kept dialing the wrong number because my fingers weren't steady enough. I even left my car in the parking structure because I was too afraid to go and retrieve it. My family came to pick me up. We went right to the police station. And after taking my statement, the police officer asked me the same thing Walter did. He said, "Do you have a gun and a license to carry?" I told him yes. And he said, "Well, I recommend you carry it with you because if somebody's going to get you, you're going to be able to get to your gun quicker than we can get to you." I have never felt so helpless in my life. Police later told me they questioned Walter and he denied ever having that conversation with me. And though they say they suspected he was lying, it was his word against mine. And as disappointed as I was that he wasn't cooperating, I was even more filled with gratitude that he warned me. And I couldn't help but to reflect on that voice, the voice of spirit the night before that told me specifically to get out of the bed, get on my knees, and pray for my ex. While I was praying, others were plotting. And I have to believe that my surrendering, my obedience to spirit served as some supernatural protection for me. I was dating at the time, insisted that I needed a more powerful firearm. And the next day, which was Saturday, he took me to Gibraltar Trade Center to purchase one. And this trade center was known for its horrible phone reception. After 2 hours of looking for a more powerful gun, I didn't even want one gun in the house. Now I'm looking for a more powerful one. It was discovered I did not have the necessary paperwork to purchase a new one. So we decided to leave. And it was at that time that my phone started blowing up and I saw that I had at least 30 missed phone calls, most from numbers I didn't recognize, but several from my oldest son, who was 17 at the time and at home looking after the kids. I called him first, and that's when he told me that there were 4 Detroit police cars in front of our home and in our driveway. This is 40 minutes out of their jurisdiction. It was at that time that the officer grabbed the phone and said they found out that the threat against me that I was claiming was credible and I needed to get home as soon as possible. For whatever reason, one of the officers decided to dig a little deeper into my complaint and found out Walter had previous charges and a past conviction surrounding a murder for hire. Officers told me for my safety and my children's safety, I needed to leave the home. The weeks, the months that followed were bananas. The college I was teaching at had to assign an armed officer who for the entire semester escorted me to and from the class and stood outside of my class while I taught. I had to pull my youngest daughters out of school and send them to stay with my sisters. Every time I got a request for a new client and they were male, I always felt like it was a setup. And during one of my sessions with a new male client, initial sessions, he reached into his jacket and I jumped up and screamed. I was convinced he was pulling out a gun to shoot me. I'm happy to say he didn't stop seeing me and we worked together for several years successfully. So I have to state that my ex has denied any involvement in any plot against my life. And because Walter could never identify who was in the back of that room supplying all of that information, we'll probably never know. As I sit here now, 16 years removed from that experience and hearing far too many stories of women whose ultimate fate was the one I feared would be mine at that time. What I know for certain is this: I am not the exception. I am one of millions of women who have been terrorized by individuals who once claimed to love us. And that's exactly why this conversation cannot stay in whispers. It cannot stay in group chats. It cannot stay behind closed doors. Because the truth is, most of these stories don't start with tragedy. They start with signs, subtle shifts, escalating language, control disguised as concern for the kids, anger that feels just a little too intense, a little too frequent, a little too consuming. And to the women listening, please hear me when I say this. Do not minimize the situation. Do not talk yourself into believing that you're overreacting. Your safety is something you cannot negotiate. But I also need to say this very clearly. This is not just a women's issue. To the men listening, and especially to the friends, the brothers, the coworkers, the family members of men who are hurting, spiraling, or showing signs of instability, your silence can be dangerous. If you hear him talking with rage, if you see him becoming obsessive, if you notice that he can't let go, if his language shifts from hurt to entitlement to control, that is not something to dismiss or step around just to avoid discomfort. At that moment, you have to step in and share your concerns, because too many of these stories end with, "I just never thought he would go that far." We all have a responsibility here to take these moments seriously, to speak up, to protect life before we are left mourning it. This is about awareness. This is about accountability. And ultimately, this is about prevention. If a hitman can find an ounce of dignity to warn and protect me, surely you can. Because no woman should have to live in fear, and no life should be lost to something that gave warning long before it became a tragedy.